welcome everyone. I want to welcome Chris Nilan. And Chris, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Cool.
I know what it's like to try and get guests to come on your podcast. It's not easy.
If it weren't for the fact that you interview mostly former NHL players, I'd love to be a guest on your podcast, but I know I'm not the appropriate guest. But anyway, I'm glad you're on my podcast. Let me start with this. So you're born and raised in Boston, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
When you were a kid, well, A, obviously you were and are athletic. B, you were, tough. You were getting in street fights or whatever. But when did it even first occur to you? Forget about the NHL. When did it even first occur to you that you would play hockey for a career, or at least a big part of your life? How old were you when you're like, I think I'll play hockey on some level as an adult?
Well, it's weird. I from a young age, I remember the first time I said I want to play in the NHL. I remember the first time I said that. I was always a big fan of the Bruins and Bob Orr, that era, right? I was right in it. Bob Orr came to Boston in the mid-'60s, whatever it was. And he just took the city by storm, like it's like New York, right? There's so many athletic teams. Boston, they pretty successful teams in Boston. They have the four major sports. And when Orr came, he just took the city by storm, and everybody knew Bobby Orr. And all these rinks started going up around the city, trying to keep the city kids, give them something else to do. And they put these rinks up. They were called MDC rinks, Metropolitan District Commission. They were run by the state, but they put them in neighborhoods around the city. And I had one right at the end of my street. They built one. And was awesome. I would go up there all the time and skate. I'd go public skating. I'd pay a quarter. I'd go in and just bomb around the ice with my friends. And first time I ever skated was on a puddle in the parking lot of a Rexall drug. My dad took us up there. I remember I was probably about 4 years old. And I'll never forget the day. I actually had a painting done of it that I gave to my dad and mom for Christmas one year. And it was so cool. Like I just remember the day I went on the first time I ever went on the ice was on that puddle. And I remember bombing around, falling down, getting up. I friggin' loved it. I loved it. And then once they built that rink up there, I was up there almost every day skating. So hockey didn't start probably till about a year and a half later. They started a hockey league called the Charlie Doyle League. And I started playing in that and then worked my way up through minor hockey. Now, when I really felt I could play in the NHL, the first time I went to a game and the Bruins were playing the St. Louis Blues. And I saw this guy out there. He wasn't the best player, and he was a pretty good skater. And when I look back at his career, I was similar type player. He was a checking player. He was a checker, shutdown guy. And his name was Mike Crombeam. And I remember seeing him out there. I mean, this guy, he's okay. I mean, I remember the Bruins, all these great players and playmakers and all that, but this guy was okay. And I'm going, shit, that guy could play in the NHL. Maybe I could one day. And I'll never forget the day and the game. And I guess that was the first time I really thought, because I saw that guy and he was just an okay player, Mike Crombie. And I said, fuck, if he can do it, I can do it.
It's interesting because I read an interview with Marcel Dion once, and he had a great junior career, I think, in Quebec. And he played, I think he was on Detroit, was his first team.
Yeah, they drafted him.
Right. And I think he scored a goal in his first game or something like that. And he called his father. He's like, I could actually play in the NHL. So it's interesting. That was your moment of realizing it, watching Crombie. And even Marcel Dion, who had this crazy great junior career, he still wasn't sure. And then his first NHL game, he's like, oh, I think I could do this.
Yeah. Well, it was always a dream of mine because of Orr and the Bruins. And when I saw Crombie, I guess that was the first time it kind of clicked to me, but I always had the mindset I wanted to play in the NHL. But when I saw that play, I said, maybe I can do it. You know, if that guy can play, I can. And then, you know, I was never the best guy on any of the teams I was on, but I was always willing to put in the work to get better. I used to shoot pucks all the time up the schoolyard right next to my house, and you know, every day I'd be down there shooting pucks. Every time I had a chance to get in the ice, I did. Minor hockey, you know, I remember playing in summer leagues and stuff where my friends would go down to Cape Cod and I wouldn't go because I had a game that weekend. Or if I did go, I'd bring my hockey bag with me and I'd thumb back on a Sunday because there used to be Sunday games on Sundays in the summer. And I go down to Cape Friday and Saturday night and I thumb back Sunday morning, my hockey bag. I bring my bag to Cape Cod with me and then thumb back and go to my game. I never wanted to miss hockey, and I never did, really. I never missed it.
It's interesting because I actually interviewed Randy Hull, and it was similar. He said in the summer, wherever he was from in Canada, I forgot. He said in the summer, all his friends would go, you know, wherever they would go, like the nearest beach or whatever. And
Yeah.
he said him and his brother went to lumberjack camp, which of course I never heard of, but I guess they do that over there. And he said
Well,
because he went to lumberjack camp, he said it made him so strong. And when he started fighting in the NHL or even in minors, he said he would just grab people and he couldn't believe how much stronger he was than everyone else. And he said, man, I thought back all those summers when I was a kid and everyone else went to the beach and I was at lumberjack camp, it paid off. So it's kind of similar.
yeah. Yeah. You know, yeah, but minor hockey was awesome. I loved it. Like I said, I always worked my butt off. High school, I went to Catholic Memorial. I played there. And as a freshman, I played in the freshman team. I didn't make the varsity freshman year. I didn't even make it sophomore year. But freshman year, I sat in the bench the whole time. Sometimes I get a shift the game. And the coach, Mr. Glenn, I was good friends with his brother years later, John, who's now passed. But John was an attorney, and so wasn't Coach Glenn. And his nickname was Bad Eyes. Bad Eyes Glenn. And he had it as a kid because he was always squinting. He needed glasses, the poor bastard. So it was Bad Eyes. So Kevin, his brother, you know, years later, because I sat in the bench the whole time. I'll never forget it. One of the last games of the year, I sat the whole game. I didn't even get a shift. I was bummed out. I was gonna quit. And I remember coming out of the locker room. I had my bag over my shoulder, and my dad was at the game. And I'm walking out to meet my father, and the coach was out in the hallway. My father come walking around the corner and fucking hit him with a shoulder and bumped him. He goes, "Hey, how come my kid sits on the bench the whole fucking game? He can't get a shift." And the coach was like, he didn't know what to say. He didn't know whether shit or go blind. My father's pretty imposing, mean looking figure. Henry was. And I was embarrassed, right? You know, I thought it was going to really screw me now. I wouldn't even dress for a game. But I remember I got in the car, and I didn't say nothing about that. He was just really pissed, I could tell, at the coach not giving me a chance. And because my father knew how much I loved hockey. And I ended up, I said, you know, I'm thinking of quitting. I don't want to play anymore. It's not fun. You know, I'm not having fun. And my father said to me, listen, you want to quit, you can go ahead and quit. Okay. But I'll tell you one thing right now. If you quit, you'll not only remember it for the rest of your life, but it will fucking haunt you. And I was like, it'll haunt me. I'm thinking, jeez. And he said, so you can quit, and that's fine. I'm not going to get in your way. You want to quit, quit. Or he said, you can stick with it, you know, work your ass off and try and get where you want to go with hockey.
That's actually great advice. And I bet you thought of that exact moment with your dad multiple times in your life.
There's so many times. It was such a fork in the road for me. And the advice I got from him, certainly helped me through my entire life. There's no question. But he, you know, I never forget that day. But again, I didn't quit, and I got to work. I still went up the schoolyard every day, and I rollerbladed. I did everything to try and get better.
When did
And
it occur to you? Let me ask you a question. What obviously you were a kid, having some fights in the street, whatever was going on with you, you figured, man, I'm actually a pretty good street fighter. And you were playing hockey. You talked about the beginnings. And obviously, you're watching NHL hockey. You understand the role of fighting. When did it even occur to you? You're like, man, actually, as I progress in my hockey career, not that I'm going to fight all the time, but I can actually use that aspect. When did that come
not
to
even, um, you know, yeah, fighting the street and all that stuff. That was natural. It just came to me, and I as a kid, I had an attitude too. People try and get over on you all the time. Growing up in the inner city, and intimidation, big part of growing up in different neighborhoods, and there's tough kids in the neighborhood, not so tough kids, and all that. But my father was a real disciplinarian. He was a Green Beret, and I, he disciplined me, and with his hands often. Um, and I knew one thing. I had to take it from him. If I wanted to live in that house, I had to live under his rules and take what was coming if I was stepping out of line. But when I went out the front door, I wasn't taking shit from fucking anybody. It was like, ain't nobody gonna fucking lay their hands on me or fuck with me, or there's gonna be a problem. And that's how I was. But so the street's one thing. The hockey fighting, listen, I wanted to make it to the NHL. I worked my way through high school, college. I get drafted, and not until my first year did I really think the fighting thing was going to be anything. Because listen, I wanted to be a hockey player, right? And I had a 5-game tryout my first season, 1979. I went to training camp in Montreal, got sent down. I was in Halifax. I had a 5-game tryout for $200 a game. And
before we get to that, just don't want to just
yeah.
I don't want to brush over the Northeastern.
Okay.
You had 26 goals in 26 games in 78, 79. That's at the point per game in a good college team. Again, you weren't fighting, maybe you had one fight or something, but were you thinking like, man, I'm a point a game with a pretty damn good college? Were you starting to get like some major confidence?
No, I was just playing. I was loving hockey. I was just playing. Wasn't even thinking getting drafted. None of that. And that's a whole story in itself, how I got drafted. I didn't get drafted because I think someone came to look at me, but at the behest of a former Montreal Canadian. One of my coaches when I was young was Judge Paul King. His brother was the governor of the state of Massachusetts at one time, Ed King. And the judge had arthritis. He was hunched over. He's really arthritic. He had a bad back, sat on the bench all day, hunched over like that. And then he would come down and coach us in hockey. And I friggin' loved the judge. And the judge loved me. And he helped me get in Northeastern. I got a scholarship to Northeastern. I went to prep school for a year. He got me in Northeastern. He helped me get in prep school. Judge had 6 kids of his own. Down syndrome boy, another boy, and 4 girls. He had 6 kids. This guy had time to go out and coach hockey. I couldn't believe it. But I loved him. He was good friends with Dickie Moore from the Montreal Canadiens and Doug Harvey. Doug was a scout at the time. The judge asked them if they would go and see the GM and just draft me. And, just pick him so he gets to go to training camp, boom. And his exact words, and I found out at his funeral to Dickie Moore, was, listen, just pick Chris Nilan. Would you do me that favor? And I guarantee you he'll do the rest. The judge told him that. Now, Dickie Moore's, a Hall of Famer. He's thinking, oh, yeah, Chris Nilan's going to just draft him. He'll do the rest. Well, I did do the rest. But that was the reason I got drafted out of college And I thought he was a pretty good player. And at Northeastern, they were all, mostly Canadian kids. And, Canadian kids, especially back at that time, it's like our game, fucking you guys, Americans, yeah. So, I was in an environment with all Canadian kids at Northeastern. And even though I did well, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to make the NHL. But I just wanted to, play my college career.
Question for you: when you were those 3 years at Northeastern, I mean, obviously you were a college student. You were going, you're playing hockey,
Yeah.
but you were in class. Did you enjoy school? Did you like learning?
No,
Did not.
I hated fucking school.
Okay.
I,
Because I just to fast forward, and we'll come right back to Nova Scotia in a second. I mean, I've seen many of your podcasts. You're a very good interviewer. You're very smart. The way your mind works, you have a high intellect. So it's just interesting that I know you were concentrating on hockey, but you're out of school. I mean, they're teaching you whatever they're teaching you. It's interesting that at that time you didn't say, "Wow, this is actually interesting. I like learning."
I learned that too late in life. I wish I learned that earlier. But and thank you for the compliment. But I half-assed it in school.
Okay, so let's go to Nova Scotia. So you get drafted. Montreal sends you to Nova Scotia. You had 304 penalty minutes in 49 games, but you also had 25 points. That's not bad. At the AHL level, still pro hockey, just one below NHL. Again, I obviously to get 304 penalty minutes, whatever happened. But I'm just wondering, when you suited up for the first game, were you still like, I'm playing hockey? Or how many fights into the season where you're like, man, I am fighting a lot?
Well, here's the deal. It started in preseason. I had that 5-game tryout, right? And in preseason, I ended up fighting this guy, Gilles. No, not Gilles. That wasn't Gilles. Bam Bam Boulanger.
Boulanger, yeah.
And we were getting a little thing and pushing and shoving. We got back to the bench, and one of my teammates, a Canadian kid who played junior, Dave Allison, looked on the bench and said, "Hey, fucking college kid. Fuck, what are you trying to start a brawl, blah, blah, blah." And I told him, "Hey, fuck you. You don't know what a brawl is, blah, blah, blah." We had words. Anyway, I just ignored him for the longest time. He suffered in silence. He thought I was. So anyway, I go out and fight him next shift, and I give it to Bam Bam. And he'd been around. He knew how to fight in the ice. My first fight, pro hockey on the ice, against him. And anyway, so preseason's over and we go to the regular season, 5-game tryout, $200 a game. First 4 games I don't play. Maine Mariners were Philly's farm team, the Broad Street Bullies. My first game I'm going to play is in Maine. My family all comes up, my father, mother, everybody's up there. Probably like 20 people, I don't know. And I get out, first shift of the game, I played probably about halfway, about 8 minutes into the game. And I end up hitting Glenn Cochran. He was a big defenseman, tough kid. Hit him, slash me, we drop our gloves and start throwing. I hit him with a shot and I cut him open. Boom. He goes nuts and is trying to get at me. I'm going after him. We get kicked out of the game. My father's pissed off. And once I had that one fight, it did a couple things. One thing it did is the next day, the coach called me in the room and said, "Hey, I thought I was getting sent down because I got kicked out of the game. I thought I was out of there, right? I was so naive to pro hockey." Yeah. I come down his room. He goes, "Hey, do you have an agent?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well, you better get one because Canadians want to sign you to a contract." One fight.
Can I just go back to the Cochran fight for a second?
Yeah.
I would say you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'd say Glenn Cochran is top, 30 fighters ever in the NHL. He's a very tough and he appears to be a little crazy. I don't know if he is.
Yeah.
He can't calm down. So I mean, just want to, before we move on, the fact that you in a sense beat him in that fight is incredibly impressive to start. I mean, to have that guy to be one of your first fights at that level, you really started at the top of the mountain.
Food chain. Yeah. I did. I didn't know. I didn't know who he was. I didn't have a clue. And what happened is the year before, Maine beat Nova Scotia in the playoffs 4 straight. They kicked the shit out of them. They intimidated them. Didn't have a tough team, and they tried to get tougher. So that as soon as I fought him, one, it got me a contract. So it opened upstairs with saying this kid can fight. Geez. And then it also opened me up to everybody else in the league, because that went around the league like wildfire. That I beat Cochran, and every team I played against, every tough guy.
When you were like going to sleep the night before a game in the AHL, it's like you said already, the word is around the league.
No, I was too stupid to know.
I was wondering if you were like, man, tomorrow we're playing so and so. I'm a little nervous.
Not even, because I didn't know anybody really. I didn't even know. I learned as I went, but I started looking at game sheets. They'd have a game sheet, and the guy had 200 minutes last year, and I'd start to, okay, this guy could be a potential fighter. Then my teammate and roommate Tim Burke made me aware of who was who on the other team, which helped me big time. But just for awareness, it wasn't going to help me in the fight.
Of course,
but just for awareness.
Okay, so you go to Montreal now. I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but we'll go back. So from 80 to 88, you had pretty much 200 plus to 300 plus penalty minutes per season. So, and also not to mention, you scored 16 goals, 21 goals, and 19 goals. It's damn impressive. You didn't get a lot of assists, interestingly. You had a lot of goals. But question, when you came to the Habs and you start, playing and fighting and scoring, whatever you're doing, how long did it take guys like, Larry Robinson, Guy Lafleur, Bob Gainey, who you ended up playing with, but is on a line, how long did it take for them to kind of, for lack of a better word, accept you?
Not long at all.
That must have felt great.
It was pretty much off the hop. Rod Langway was the first guy to greet me when I got called up to Atlanta. Yeah, and then I remember Larry being there, but those guys, once I started having a couple fights and sticking up for guys, and guys got to know guys, it was pretty quick. Yeah.
I want to just talk about fighting style for a second. So let me just say this, and I'd love to get your insight. There's many different fighting styles of. I think you're probably one of the most scientific hockey fighters I've ever seen. I mean, you really had an amazing style of fighting. You threw uppercuts. You didn't just throw let's say like a Kevin McClellan. Not that Kevin McClellan's not good, but like a guy who just throwing. You kind of waited. Like I remember one fight when you fought Darryl Stanley, and it was kind of a moment, and you kind of waited and then put him down at the end. You had a very, very scientific style, tying up the hands, switching hands. You were, let's say 6 feet 200 or whatever.
You did your homework.
You find guys like Dave Brown who are 6'3", whatever. So I remember one time you had said that in your first game or your first season, you fought O'Reilly, and you didn't do as well as you thought you'd like to do, and you said to yourself, I got to kind of change my style. I can't, So how did you become such a great fighter on the ice? I mean, I think besides maybe Ben Wilson, who also had kind of a scientific, tie up uppercut style, I think you have one of the most impressive fighting strategies I've seen in the NHL ever. How did you do that?
Well, I had to, and I say that because, listen, anybody can stand there and just throw wild, right? But boy, if you want to stay around and have longevity, one, you can't lose a lot. And two, if you end up breaking your jaw, your nose, whatever, getting your teeth knocked out, that can hurt, right? And it can shake your confidence. Not always easy to bounce back from. And I realized that night when I fought O'Reilly. I fought Jonathan first, and I fought O'Reilly. And O'Reilly, I just said, I'm going to throw. I know he's a lefty. And boom, I threw a punch, and then boom, boom. He hit me with fucking, I didn't know where I was. I was like, my eyes were watering. My blood was pouring out of my head. I remember my pride was so wounded. I loved O'Reilly, and I ended up going to the penalty box, and I sat there, and I remember him pointing at his left, right, and I'm freaking fuck you, asshole, and I ended up saying to myself, I can't fight like that if I'm going to last, because again, you have to win most of your fights, or if you don't win them, a tie, or if you lose, at least you don't look like you got beat too bad, because it can shake the confidence of your teammates, right?
And by the way, you really never, I think in your entire career, even when you played, in Boston or Montreal at the end, when you didn't feel like you were as good a fighter as maybe you were when you were younger. But I don't think you ever really got beat bad. In fact, I saw an interview once with you where you mentioned towards the end and you fought Stu Grimson. I mean, I actually watched the Grimson fight. It wasn't that bad. I mean, you didn't,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was
And
pretty
McKenzie,
close
I fought
actually.
them both back to back nights. Jim
Yeah.
McKenzie
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that. You mentioned I think it was in the documentary about you, that Lemaire, who you liked a lot as a coach,
Well,
he said to you like, hey, chill, you don't have to fight as much, whatever. And you didn't quite trust him, even though you liked him a lot. I'm just wondering, like at that point in your career, you had a lot of goals. You're on a very good line. You proved yourself many times over in every way, shape, and form. Why didn't you trust Lemaire?
because I saw her as a kid when guys stopped fighting, like with the Bruins, the exit door was right there. It was like, all right, he's not fighting anymore. He doesn't want to do it anymore. See you later. You're out of here. And I'm thinking, like Lemaire told me, he said, you fight too much. He said, you got to take advantage. People don't come near you. Take advantage of the ice. You can play hockey. Blah, blah. The guy just was like, he was an intravenous of confidence for me. He was incredible. And he really took interest in me as a human being. And I love that about him. I loved him. Everything about him as a coach, I loved. And yeah, I didn't trust him because I thought, geez, and I eventually did, but I was worried about being shown the exit door if I slowed down the fighting. And if anything, like I said before, I kicked it up a notch.
Yeah. When I have a question about just kind of like personal thoughts on some guys you fought. Like, for example, I just give an example. Let's say there was a bench clearing brawl between Montreal and Quebec. I think you fought Randy Moeller a couple times.
Yeah.
Was your attitude kind of like, look, and were you thinking like, I have nothing against Randy Moeller. I don't even know this guy, but under the circumstances, obviously I'm going to look for him. Or were you thinking like, I'm going after this prick. I don't like this guy. What was your mindset looking for a guy in a situation like that?
Depending on the team, like Philly, the night we had the brawl before the game,
With Dave Brown?
I started with Shel Samerson. He was there, the first guy. And I'm there. I'm not going to fight this guy. He's not a fighter. One, yeah, he's big. I don't care about that. But he's just not a fighter. And I said, I got to wait because they got Stanley, they got Dave Brown. They come out, and Brownie didn't have a shirt on. So I'm like, ooh, I got to think about this one. And I bought some time and eventually fought him for quite a while. And if I didn't have one of the tough guys, then one of my teammates are going to get stuck with that guy. So that would have bothered me. So I always wanted to get the toughest guy, and at least I get him out of the way. And then if other guys want to dance, they dance. I can't do nothing about that. But it was always, I had that mindset. Now, Mola wasn't the toughest. That happened to be he was a tough kid, but that wasn't the situation there. He was trying to keep me from getting to Carbonneau with Dale Hunter on him, punching him in the head. And I finally said, I got to hit him. And I did. And off we went. But yeah, I would look for the toughest guy. I would.
When back to that famous brawl in, with the Flyers against Montreal, it's been documented many times. We don't have to go through all the details. No. But I have a question. Obviously, Dave Brown, super tough. He's still basically in his prime. Big, no equipment really, is maybe his shoulder pads on. It's hard to really
nothing
any arm or something like that. And I saw an interview with you once where after a while, because you just said you fought him for a long time, he said like, "Oh, you had enough, or is this we good?" And you said no and hit him. When he said, "Have you had enough?" and you said no and hit him, was there any part of you that was like, "Yeah, you know what? I not that I've had enough, like you kicked my ass, but it's been about a draw. Like I would like to end this." Like, what was your mindset to keep going?
I just like, no, I haven't. I'm not quitting. You're asking me to step out of this. I'm not. And I just fuck you. And I threw another punch, and away we went again. I didn't care. My mindset was maybe I hit him, I'll put him down, but it was hard to put down. He come on my podcast with me. It was awesome. I just
I
friggin'
saw that
love.
episode. I
I
saw that.
friggin' love the guy.
Yeah.
He's just he's a good guy. Really.
He didn't listen. The guy fought so many times. He beat so many guys. You guys had some good, draws and very close fights. I think I only saw him lose twice, like lose.
Yeah.
I think Probert got him pretty good, and I think Rob Ray got him pretty good. Besides that, the guy, his record is pretty incredible.
Yeah, he was tough. Long arms and big guy. Mean.
So I wanted to just to go back a little bit to the fighting style, just briefly before we move on to the next thing. Some guys who are smaller, like a Wendell Clark, was smaller than the guys he fought, but Wendell Clark did not have the tie-up strategy. Wendell Clark was just like an animal, even though he was smaller. Then you have a guy, let's say, like John Cordick, rest in peace. Cordick also didn't seem to have much of a strategy. He's just throwing his lefts, and we said McClellan. Did you kind of forget Wendell Clark, but did you kind of like, and I guess you were teammates with Cordick for a while, but did you like fighting a guy like McClellan, who you knew what he was going to do, or Cochran, who's just going to throw the right because they were predictable? Or did you like fighting a more scientific fighter like yourself, like a Ben Wilson, where you're both going to tie
I
up?
never thought about that.
Didn't care. Okay.
No, I didn't care. I wouldn't know if a guy's a righty or a lefty, but my whole thing was focused, yes, on what I have to do, not on worrying about what the style of another guy, because I was going to fight the way I wanted to, not the way they wanted me to. And that's why I lasted as long as I did. And, Wendell, that's how he knew how to fight. That's how he fought. Now, I'm not going to say he didn't fight as much as me, but when he fought, and there's no question, he's fucking tough as nails. He didn't fight as much as I did. It was more my job than it was his. He was a better player than me as far as putting numbers up. There's no question. But the fighting part, yeah, he had that style. And like I said, I was a real good second half fighter too, because I had great max VO2. And one of the guys who pointed that out on a few occasions was John Davidson when he was. I remember I was doing a game and when I was with the Rangers, and he said, "Now watch Nilan here because he's a real good second half fighter." The fight looked like it was done, and it wasn't. And he said,
I actually have seen that telecast, and I think you were fighting either Karkner or Berube on the Flyers. I think.
Yeah,
that was true. By the way, are you just genetically someone who has great wind? Or did you just jog a lot and just
most of that's genetic, right? But
Yeah.
I rode the bike a lot and stuff like that. It's funny, and I'll tell you, when I was with Boston, and I was near the end of my career, I was 34. We do the test before the year, and Wes Waltz was a first round pick for the Bruins. 18-year-old kid, he's at training camp. So we do all the tests. We get the results back, and Mike Boyle, the physical education guy, comes in, the therapist, and he comes in, he's giving the results. This guy did this, and it comes to max VO2, and Ray Bork number 1, Chris Nilan number 2. And they go through the whole team, and Wes Walsh was like down at the end. And he said, "Anybody got any questions?" Wes says, "Yeah, I do." He said, I don't fucking get that. Like, I'm 18 years old. He said, I'm like one of the last guys on the team. And the day we did that test, Knuckles came in. He had 3 cups of coffee and 3 cigarettes. And he comes in second. How is that? I don't fucking get these tests, he said. And Mike said, listen, here's the deal. You know, a lot of that is genetics. You know,
Question.
yeah, you can work on that, but a lot's genetics.
Yeah, and I did, and even before Davidson said that, I did see that you had great wind and you were a great first half fighter too on second half. Um, Question: you said something I just would like to ask about. I think it was in the last Gladiators documentary, which I watched. And by the way, I also read your book. It was great.
Thank
I
you.
read your book. I read your book a while ago, and I saw the documentary a while ago. But you mentioned when you were on the Bruins, you know, again, we don't have to go through the whole thing. If someone wants to know, they can watch the documentary. When you hadn't played the bid, and I think it was Bonus or O'Connell or whoever asked you to play, and you told them to fuck off. You
Bonus.
said something that I didn't quite understand. You said, and look at O'Connell. This guy played his whole career like a pussy. Like, what did that mean? Like, what does it mean for an NHL player to do that? Does it mean that whenever there was a scrum, he would skate away? I didn't quite understand when you said he played his career like that. What does that really mean?
He just wasn't a guy that stuck a nose in there all the
I see.
time or go in the corner for stuff like that.
Okay.
And he was, I remember he came up to me on the ice and he said, you know, geez, I know what you're going through because I was near the end of my career. And he dealt with that. But I said, you don't have a fucking idea what I'm going through. You didn't fucking play the game like me. And he didn't. So I think the guy with the fighting role, it's a little different. And I say that because uh, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of jam to do that job on a nightly basis, stick up for your teammates, be there for your teammates, night in and night out. There's a lot of emotion that goes into it. And I'm certainly a deeply emotional person. And I wear it on my sleeve. But yeah, he just didn't know what I was going through because
Okay.
he couldn't because he's not me.
I totally now I totally understand that. Okay. Another thing, you were the assistant coach for New Jersey for a bit, and I saw in an interview once you said like these guys needed to be babysat. You know, you were not in the mood for this kind of nonsense with the players. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit? What were these players acting like that you were just like, what are these? You know, I'm not your babysitter. What was that about?
But can you go through that again? I'm sorry, that phone call messed me up.
No problem.
I gotta
I was
shut my
saying that
phone off.
no problem. I was saying that in one of the interviews, or it might have been the documentary, you mentioned that when you were the assistant coach for New Jersey, you found it frustrating because you felt like, oh, these players, they need to be like, they need a babysitter or
Yeah.
whatever. Could you elaborate, like, how were they acting? Not everyone, but how are some of the players acting that made you think like what you said? What were they doing?
Well, here's the deal. I took over for Larry Robinson. He was the assistant. He was a defenseman, and I was a forward, coaching D. And it's not fucking rocket science. You know when I know when to change guys. I know who to put on the ice at certain situations. But some of those guys didn't like me on that team because I fought them. Scott Stevens, Danico,
Got it.
John McClain. They disliked me before I got there, and I'm not making any excuses. Um, I was not a good assistant coach. Now, and I say that without hesitation because it's not in my DNA to be that way. You have to be that buffer between the head coach and the players. You got to schmooze guys. You got to be, oh, you know, you got to change their diapers. You got to powder their bums, and you got to fucking baby them. And I'm not like that. And it cost me and the team that year. Lemare knew when he hired me that I understood the system that he had in place. I knew how to convey that to the players, and um, yeah, it didn't work. It didn't work. The players felt like they had two head coaches,
Got it.
and,
When you mentioned like Stevens, Danico, McLean, it's interesting. When I interviewed Randy Holt on this show, he said like, he'd be playing for whoever and he fought like, X amount of guys and he get traded to that team. He's like, I used to hate these guys. These guys are great. I love these guys. So
Fucking guys are great.
right. So how did that not translate to, let's say, Stevens or Danico?
When you're a coach, it's
Oh, it's
totally
different. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
You
When
weren't
you're coaching, it's different. If I got traded there and I was going to war with them, but as a coach, you looked at differently. I'll just give you one instance, like with Danico and Stevens. Stevens always wanted to be on the power play, first power play. LeMay never wanted to put him there because he didn't think he was that bright, and he wasn't. But Stevens was really good 5-on-5 and great penalty killer, but he wasn't Bobby Orr, and LeMay knew that. So he said, if you ever put Scott out, always on the second PP. I want him 5-on-5 and killing penalties. And I don't want him the first part of the power play. So I never put him on. He would fucking turn around and look. And Jacques always told me, Chris, never make eye contact with him. Look right over their fucking heads. Don't even, because you don't need the confrontation. And I didn't. And then Danico, one night, I mean, he sucked. He was out all night, probably fucked up, and he's having a shit game. And he was like -4. He was on the ice, just terrible. So third period comes, and he had one shift, the first shift and the third, and he just sucked. Another puck goes in the net when he's out there. So LeMay looks at me, and he goes like this. Done. So next time to put Dano on the ice, I don't. He's fucking like this, holding his stick. Keep looking at me. I'm just looking at the game. His fucking steam was coming out of his ears. He wanted to kill me. But yeah, these fucking guys didn't like me. And that's okay. I get it. Dano and John McClain were really close with Lou and the ownership. And yeah. And I'm not blaming it on those guys. I take full responsibility for not doing that.
How did you like being a head coach in the minor leagues?
I loved it. Yeah. And I just loved it. I love being a head coach because I could put the systems in I wanted, deal with players the way I wanted. I absolutely loved it. I didn't stick with it. I should. I got coach of the year my first year in that league. I almost got the job in Providence. Peter Laviolette got it over me. And then I didn't go back because the team moved, the East Coast League team moved to Jackson, Mississippi, and I didn't want to go to Jackson. You got to pay a price if you want to be a coach, and that's part of the price. I didn't want to go there. And I really thought I should have been in the American League quicker than I was. And
Okay, I hear you.
That's on me.
I want to ask you just about a couple fighters that I think you fought all these guys. And like you already said, you're like, look, I wasn't bending my style for them. Maybe I knew if they were righty or lefty. I wasn't strategizing too much. But, with that said, I'm just curious about a couple fighters. My first question is about Paul Baxter. Why was Paul Baxter so disliked around the league? What was he doing exactly?
He was a prick.
Okay.
He's just a prick.
Okay.
He stick, fucking dirty shit. But,
another player who I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, who you also fought, who was also disliked, was Jim Corn. Am I correct?
Yeah, Jimmy Crackcorn, I played against him in college. He was at Providence. I remember I used to slash him in the ankle all the time. And, one day we're going to fight if he ever got the NHL and if I did. But we couldn't fight in college. But I don't know about the dislike part. I don't know.
Okay, fair enough.
I have a problem with Jimmy.
I had heard that maybe. Yeah. Okay. Another fighter, you fought Tiger Williams, right? You fought him.
Yeah.
What was that like, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, breaking his nose.
Okay. So there it is. Perfect.
He was tough to fight. He had the style like me.
He did.
And he was tough to fight. Yeah, it was really you know, but he could go long too, Tiger.
Yeah.
He was a character.
Yeah. What about Barry Beck? I think you fought him once, maybe twice. I believe he was incredibly strong. Am I correct?
Yeah, really strong. He actually cut me in New York in a game, and he had a cast on, like a half cast. And when he hit me, he cut me. I get stitched up. But yeah, he's a big, strong D man. Yeah, I didn't really know him too well.
Mm.
No.
I did interview him. I interviewed him on here. Really nice guy. I really enjoyed it. How about Nick Fatiu, another dangerous dude?
Nicky Pieface. I love Nicky. Yeah, we fought. He apologized to me for they sent him on the ice in Montreal. He jumped off the bench. Vadnais sent him, and we ended up in a little fight. We fought once, I think, in Philly, maybe. But yeah, Nick wasn't he wasn't happy with that. When Vadnais sent him on the ice, he told me, he said, "I wish I never did that." And I played against him when he was in Calgary. There, the Stanley Cup, we won that year. I remember seeing Nicky Pieface in line. I love Nick Fatiu. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Nick Fatiu, I think, gave Ben Wilson one of his only clear losses. I don't know if you ever saw that fight, but he really kicked Ben Wilson's ass, which didn't happen too much.
No.
So, and then the only other fighter I wanted to ask you about was Jay Miller, who I know you're friends with, or I believe you're friends with.
Yeah.
And I think in an interview once you said that he was one of the best fighters in the league. What made him such a great fighter? Because he never appeared to punch too hard, but he seemed to do real well.
No, he could hit hard.
Oh, he could? Okay.
Could hit hard. And the thing about Jay, he could take a punch.
Yeah.
Like he could stand there and take a punch. And yeah, he knew his job. He did it. Funny, Jay, he got called up. And I remember the fight, actually. He got called up. They had last change. It was in Boston. They put him out against me. They pulled off the line, Middleton line, and they put Jay out. And I said, I know what the fuck you're here for. We're going. As soon as I said, we're going as soon as the puck dropped. They dropped the puck. I came right after them. And Curran came in from my right.
Yeah, yeah.
And I saw Jay, and I saw Curran coming. I threw the punch over Jay's shoulder and hit Curran on the way in. And then I fought him. But Jay actually gave me credit for him not making it to the NHL, but getting called up. He said the reason they asked him about me. He said, well, the reason I got called up because of Chris Nilan. That's why I'm here. And, he actually said, I thank him for my job or something in the Boston papers. And it was funny. But yeah, Jay's a good man.
Yeah. It's fine. I wasn't going to mention Curran.
But one guy, I'll tell you, you mentioned him, Darryl Stanley.
Yep.
Okay. I fought him quite a few times.
Yep.
Now, I always looked at Bronny like he's the big guy. I went down a fight night in Philadelphia. They had it. And Bronny and Stan were there together. They're good buddies.
Yeah.
That Darryl Stanley, I never underestimated anybody, but I didn't think he was that big a kid, right? And I'm standing next to him in street clothes. His fucking arms were down to his knees. His hands are dangling down there. He had longer arms than I ever thought. And his hands were friggin' huge. I'm like, are you kidding me? And when I think back of fighting him, I just didn't look at him as overly big because of Brownie and all these other guys that towered over him. And I was like, man, if there's a guy ever underestimated, it was him.
Yeah. That was he was tough, and you did really well against him. What about I wasn't even going to ask about these guys, but they just popped in my head. What about the obvious, Probert and Kosar? You fought them both at least once, am I correct?
Proby, I think twice. One of them was half-assed, and then Kosar I never fought.
Okay.
Imagine.
Kosar just had that incredibly hard right hand. He was almost like what's his name? Almost like
he had a bomb, I guess.
Like a Tony Twist type.
Yeah.
They fought a couple times. It was kind of interesting.
Twist is nuts.
Yeah.
He's fucking crazy. Yeah. He used to sit, right? He used to go be in their building. He'd go sit on their bench with the shirt on, all ripped up, just sit there, watch their practice. Like, they're fucking nuts. That's nuts.
I saw an interview with Nick Fatiu once, and he said he did that also, something like that, similar.
Yeah, I never did that shit.
Yeah,
I'm like, fuck that.
yeah. Um, let's just go to your podcast. Your podcast is great. You're a great interviewer. You really are. Like I said before, you're you know, we already talked about it. You
I
obviously have
appreciate it. Thank you.
an innately high intellect because the way you're organized in your thoughts and you bring your guest along, it's very impressive. And you have some really good guests, and obviously you're connected because of what you've done. Um, have you had any podcast guests? Here's my question, that told you something that you were like really surprised about? Like, was there any insight by interviewing any of these like Theo Fleury or whoever, where you're like, wow, that's super interesting. I didn't know that. That's cool.
Oh, geez, let me think. Well, Archie Henderson, I just had Archie, Big Arch,
Yeah.
like Korea minor leaguer, and an awesome guy. Um, but I guess the thing I didn't know is that big brawl he had where he got guys stuck him in the face. Just like I never heard anything about that, and almost could have ended his career. Cut him open pretty bad. Guy jammed him up.
Mhm.
I was surprised at that one. I didn't hear that. Geez, I guess one of the things that surprised me most, because Lemire doesn't do any of these, right? He hates interviews. He doesn't like the media. And I had Jacques Lemire on for close to 3 hours. 3 hours. And I just, like, he didn't want to get off. We had such a good time. It was such a great interview. I have a couple coming up that are going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to putting them out as Biz from Spittin' Chicklets and John Cooper from Tampa Bay. I love John Cooper. What an awesome. I never met the guy and loved him just by what I see on the bench, how he is in his interviews, and I've never met him. I said, I love this. I call him Super Duper Johnny Cooper.
It's
And
funny.
he
It's
is
funny.
super duper. Just I would have loved to play for a guy like that.
Yeah, it's
I
funny
played for
because
Mike Milbury. I love Milbury.
yeah. When you mentioned Lemaire, it's kind of funny how it came full circle, because here you were many years ago not quite trusting him, and then here's a guy who doesn't like interviews, and he trusts you so much that he talks to you for 3 hours. So that
Yeah,
came all the way around. There's a lot of trust.
that did.
Um, just kind of wrapping up, kind of one of my last questions is, you obviously, either as a teammate or playing against, maybe just like sitting on the bench watching a player, you played against, or with, like Gretzky, Lemieux, Yzerman, Messier, some of the Russians that played on Detroit. Who was the player that maybe you were just sitting on the bench, or maybe you were on the ice and you looked at this guy like, holy cow, this guy's in his own world, like just skill wise, who were you really impressed with?
Gretzky, Lemieux, the usual suspects. Honestly, like it's incredible watching what those guys did. And I was on the ice against those guys quite a bit, right? Because we had the job of shutting them down. And just there were times, obviously power play, stuff like that, when they were on the ice and I wasn't, where you'd watch them and it's a whole different level of talent that just you don't get to see often. You see these guys come along. You see it now with Austin Matthews, with Bedard, with Zegras. These guys with uber talent. Kucherov, like, hello, guy's an incredible player. Like, these guys just they got something going on there, talent wise, that just puts them above so many players, and it's kind of cool to watch, and it's really cool to watch when they're on your team too, because I mean, I was play with some great Hall of Famers, and Guy Lafleur certainly. I got there after the fourth Stanley Cup in a row, but I seen the damage that guy could do, and I played with him here and I played with him in New York. I loved Guy. Just an awesome human being, great guy, great superstar talent. Like, but yeah, just the usual suspects,
Yeah.
I would say.
Besides the obvious, you mentioned LaFleur and Robinson and Gainey and some other people earlier. When you got traded to the Rangers, who are your favorite? I'm not saying personal. You might have had good friends, but who are your favorite Rangers to play with?
Mark Hardy, who's a defenseman.
Uh,
Oppo. I love the Bees. Bees, a good guy as a teammate.
Hey,
Gresh.
by the way, Greshner,
I
I
love
always
Gresh.
marveled. The guy would skate in slow motion, but he was such a good stick handler. He would just like stick handle through guys going in slow motion. I never quite figured that out.
Yeah, I love Gresh. Yeah, good man. Brian Molly was a good guy. We had a good crew of guys down there. Jeez, I look at them. James Patrick. I love the Swedes. I love
Erickson.
Yanni Eriksson and Ulf Dahlen and the other one, Thomas Sandstrom. Everybody hated Thomas, right? Everybody around the league hated him. I
He was
loved him.
tough, when
Yeah,
Sandstrom
he
played,
was.
yeah, when he played for LA, he had a broken leg. They just like taped his leg up and he played in the playoffs with a broken leg. He's a tough
The
guy.
thing I'll say about Thomas, like everybody, Brownie cross-checked him that time, but everybody went after Thomas. He was a good player, so they slashed him. They give him, he'd get hit a lot, and people, here's a guy who stuck up for himself. He didn't look for, yeah, he wasn't a fighter, but he would. Guys would give him so much shit, and he'd come out there and play, and he'd give it back, and that's why guys hated him, because guys like him was supposed to take that and fucking, you know, I'm supposed to be able to do that to him, and he shouldn't do anything back, but I should have to fight his teammate.
Yeah.
Thomas fucking, he'd stick you right back, and that's why guys didn't like him.
There
But
was
I
a
love
bench,
Thomas.
there was a bench clearing brawl years ago, Islanders Rangers, and he was on the ice, and Dwayne Sutter just went, jumped him, attacked him. I kind of felt bad for him, but he survived.
Wasn't a fighter, but didn't take shit from anybody.
Anyway, Chris, thank you for this interview. I loved it,
Yeah.
and I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I hope things go well in the future for you with your business and everything. Sounds like you got it going on. So good stuff, and thanks for having me.